Hi, my name is Jason Major, and welcome to another episode of the Biblical Cinematic Universe. This is the show that takes biblical films and reviews all the films that have come out from the beginning of cinema up until present day. Today I decided to take an Easter film that you may not have heard of. Back when The Passion of Christ came out back in 2004, a lot of studios were looking at different films that they could release on video or release on TV, and this was one of those films that they released on TV during the Easter season, and it was called Judas, simply called Judas, and the movie stars Jonathan Schaff and Jonathan Scarf in the main roles. And when I originally saw this back in 2004, I looked up Jonathan Schaff's name on the internet and found out that he had played a movie called That Thing You Do, which was a movie directed by Tom Hanks, star Tom Hanks, as a manager leading this band of one-hit wonder musicians. And so I was like, oh, okay, he was from that. And I always thought Jonathan Schaff played Jesus. He didn't play Jesus. He played Judas. So for the last 15 years, I actually believed a lie about Judas. Kind of ironic, in my opinion. So this movie basically is about Judas, and it starts off with Judas meeting Jesus when he overthrows the tables in the temple, and in a very comical scene, Judas is like telling him, like, yeah, thank you for sticking it up to those, self-righteous so-and-sos, and Jesus is like, oh, don't be, I lost my temper. We know that he didn't lose his temper. It was a conscious decision that Jesus did, because he was making a statement against the self-righteous religious establishment of the day. But in this movie, and I mean this more as a joke, but Jesus is portrayed as more like, well, kind of like a hipster youth pastor who is fresh from Bible college and doesn't really know about anything about the real world and how the real world works, and he loves everybody, and he doesn't really know how to deal with confrontation, and he's kind of emotionally immature and looking for people's approval. That's kind of what Jesus is like in this movie. And when I first watched it, I remember thinking, this movie's terrible. And now I watch it, I still think it's terrible, but I love it because it makes sense. This is how Judas believes Jesus is. He's in Judas's mind, he's like, the Messiah is supposed to be another King David. He's supposed to be a warrior. He's supposed to be a fighter. And Jesus, you're not willing to make the hard decisions. And so it's kind of funny, and to me at least, because I have a strange sense of humor. But it's also kind of makes sense that this is how Judas would see Jesus, as kind of this guy who he's almost there, but he's not quite there, one of the great examples in this movie is that there's a scene where Jesus asks Judas, what should he do next? And Judas suggests, give your power, give your anointing to your followers so that they may heal the sick and, raise the kingdom in your name. And so Jesus does this, and he kind of does this, prayer for them. And then Judas is walking along with one of the disciples and says to him, all right, yes, we can raise armies in his name. And the other disciples all, is that what he was saying? I don't think so. And then the Judas is like, oh, yes, that's exactly what he's saying. And the disciples like, oh, I guess his words go over my head. And so they go to the village, and Judas is preaching this message to people and saying, like, become followers of Jesus, and if you're not, you're cowards. Not exactly a great evangelistic message. And then saying, like, if you become disciples of Jesus, we will overthrow the Romans, and if you die in battle, Jesus will raise you from the dead. And I thought it was very comical. And I think that the movie does a fun job in terms of, like, showing from Judas' point of view. It really focuses on Judas and Jesus. And so, for example, like when Peter becomes kind of the leader of the group, so to speak, Judas has this jealousy, but he also wants to see if he can manipulate Peter into making Jesus do what Judas wants, which I thought was interesting. And then, of course, it goes into later the more the passion narrative and gets a little bit more serious. I thought it was a fun movie, and I thought like the performance of the guy who plays Judas is pretty good. The guy who plays Jesus is really, to me, comical and kind of, like I said, ineffective. But I'm not sure if that's what he was going for or if that's just because he's just really cheesy at the role. But it is an enjoyable 1.5 hour movie. One other little side note of interest is that there's an actor in the movie called Elliot Levi, or maybe Levy, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. He plays in this movie a friend of Judas, not an established biblical character, a character they created called Eliakim, I think. And ironically, that actor had been in other Jesus movies around that same time period. He was in the Gospel of John around the same time period. And he was also in one of the other Jesus miniseries, which was a miniseries that starred Gary Oldman as Pontius Pilate. So he played 3 different roles in 3 different Jesus movies within like a 4-year window, which was kind of interesting to me. I would recommend this movie as like an hour and a half of it not taken seriously. Just saying, hey, I've seen all the other Bible movies, I've seen all the other Jesus movies, I want something different this time. I would recommend it as a movie which you might enjoy. I would say that it's probably cinematically or from how good is it from a TV movie standpoint? I'd probably say like a 6 out of 10 is what I'd give it. It's entertaining. It's very quick to watch, and he gets through the story beats that you need to get through, but giving you a kind of a different angle of how to view Jesus. And also, you kind of see, a little bit more in understanding why Jesus is his motivation. And so I do recommend it as an interesting, different take of the Jesus story. Well, this has been another episode of the Biblical Cinematic Universe. Until next time, bye-bye.